Prologue, the murmur of a storm. The salty breeze of the Atlantic brushed against the shores of the 13 colonies, a constant reminder of the distance between this new world and Old England. But in 1775, that breeze carried something more, the murmur of a storm brewing in anxious hearts. There was discontent, there was hope, but above all, there was fear. The streets of Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston buzzed with whispers of liberty, while British patrols, with their blood-red coats, maintained a suffocating watch. The colonists were not a united people. Loyalists to the crown, known as Tories, clashed with patriots who spoke of a manifest destiny, self-governance. In homes, markets, and even churches, debates grew fierce. "How can we stand against the most powerful army in the world?" asked an elderly merchant. "And how can we live under the shadow of tyranny without rebelling?" responded a young man. Samuel Adams, in a candle-lit tavern, wrote feverishly in a corner, "No more tyranny, no more taxation without representation." He thought it was an echo of what many felt, but no one dared to shout out loud yet. Chapter I. The spark is lit. On April 19, 1775, in the small towns of Lexington and Concord, the first spark of the Revolution turned into fire. Townsmen armed with old muskets and farming tools faced the British Army. At dawn, the arrival of the Redcoats, marching with terrifying precision, heralded the start. Opposing them stood a handful of militiamen led by Captain John Parker. "Do not fire unless fired upon," ordered Parker, his voice hoarse but firm. He knew his men were outnumbered and outgunned. However, he also understood it was time to decide, submit or fight. The initial shot, its origin still a mystery, shattered the silence. In seconds, the field turned to chaos. The Redcoats advanced, but the colonists, despite their losses, fought back with unexpected ferocity. When the dust settled, the news had spread like wildfire throughout the 13 colonies. War had begun. Meanwhile, in Boston, a woman named Abigail Adams, wife of John Adams, listened to the rumors from her home's window. She could see British soldiers patrolling the streets. Abigail, a woman of sharp intellect and brave heart, picked up a quill and wrote to her husband, who was far away in Philadelphia, "Remember the ladies, John, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. If we have no voice nor representation, we are determined to foment a rebellion of our own." Chapter 2. The men of Philadelphia. In June 1776, as the war intensified, a group of men gathered in a stifling room in Philadelphia. Among them were Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and other visionaries. Their mission was clear: draft a document declaring the colony's independence. But it was no simple task. They knew every word written would be a direct provocation to King George III. "This is not just a declaration," John Adams said during one meeting. "It is a manifesto, a cry for freedom that will resonate through the ages. But we must be cautious. Every phrase will be judged, not just by our contemporaries but by generations to come." Thomas Jefferson, with quill in hand, began to write. His words flowed like a river. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. The debates were intense. Should they directly condemn slavery? Jefferson included a paragraph criticizing the slave trade, but it was removed under pressure from Southern delegates. It was a wound that would scar the newborn nation for decades. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. As bells rang out in Philadelphia, patriots celebrated, but for loyalists, it was an unforgivable act of treason. Chapter 3. The war spreads. The war was not a series of glorious victories for the patriots. It was a constant struggle, filled with humiliating defeats and desperate small triumphs. By 1777, the situation was grim. British troops captured Philadelphia, forcing the Continental Congress to flee. George Washington, commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, faced monumental challenges. His army was small, poorly equipped, and often on the verge of disbandment. In December 1777, Washington and his men set up camp at Valley Forge for the winter. There, they faced not just the enemy but also hunger, disease, and relentless cold. The Marquis de Lafayette, a young French nobleman, arrived at the camp that winter. Lafayette had left his comfortable life in Europe to fight for the cause of freedom in America. "General Washington, I came here because I believe in the dream of this country," he said. Washington, moved by the young man's devotion, replied, "Then we will fight together. Not for ourselves, but for those who will come after us." At Valley Forge, despite the terrible conditions, something extraordinary happened. A Prussian officer named Friedrich von Steuben trained the troops, transforming them into a more disciplined and effective force. What emerged from that winter was not just an army but a symbol of resilience and determination. Chapter 4: The Role of the Forgotten. While generals drafted plans and congressmen signed documents, thousands of people invisible to history books bore the weight of the revolution on their shoulders. They were the forgotten ones, those without a voice in the Continental Congress but whose sweat and blood were just as vital to the cause of liberty. Abigail Adams, in her home in Braintree, Massachusetts, became more than a wife. While her husband, John Adams, debated in Philadelphia, Abigail managed the family farm and wrote letters filled with political advice and moral guidance. One night, as she watched the flames of her fireplace, she reflected, "We are the guardians of the home, but also of the nation. Without us, men could not fight, but will they remember us when all of this is over?" On the battlefields, women not only cooked and tended to wounded soldiers, some, like Molly Pitcher, took up arms when their husbands fell. At the Battle of Monmouth, Molly, whose real name was Mary Ludwig Hayes, ran through the crossfire carrying water to exhausted soldiers. When her husband was injured, she took his place at the cannon, firing with fierce determination. On the other hand, Deborah Sampson decided she couldn't stay home and wait. She cut her hair, donned men's clothing, and joined the Continental Army under the name Robert Shirtleaf. For months, she fought in silence, concealing her true identity. In one skirmish, she was wounded in the thigh, but instead of revealing her secret, she extracted the bullet herself using a knife and a needle. Her courage inspired others, though her story remained ignored for a long time. It wasn't just women who fought from the shadows. African Americans, both free and enslaved, played a crucial role in the revolution. Thousands of black men, like Peter Salem and James Armistead Lafayette, joined the Patriot cause in the hope that freedom for the nation would also mean their own freedom. James Armistead Lafayette was a spy whose intelligence proved vital at the Battle of Yorktown. Pretending to be a loyal slave to the British, he gained access to General Cornwallis's military plans. His bravery and cunning were instrumental in the victory, though his recognition as a free man took years to come. Meanwhile, Native Americans faced a moral and strategic conflict. Some tribes, like the Oneida, allied with the Patriots, while others, like the Mohawks, supported the British in the hope of protecting their lands. For them, the war was not just a clash between colonists and the British but a battle for their own survival. The revolution was not a uniform story of heroes in blue coats. It was a tapestry of individual sacrifices, each adding a piece to the puzzle of a nascent nation. But in the heart of every one of the forgotten burned a flame, the hope that their contribution, though unwritten in history books, would change the course of history. Chapter V: Redemption at Yorktown. On September 28, 1781, Patriot and French troops marched to Yorktown, Virginia. This would be the decisive confrontation. Cornwallis and his British army were trapped, surrounded by land and sea. The arrival of the French fleet, commanded by Admiral de Grasse, had closed off any escape by water. General George Washington, after years of defeats and small victories, stood on the brink of what might be the final triumph. Walking among his troops, he observed the weary yet determined faces of his men. Some were battle-hardened veterans, others, young men who had barely known peace. Alexander Hamilton, eager to prove himself, volunteered to lead an assault on one of the British Army's most fortified positions, Redoubt No. 10. It was a suicide mission. Bullets and cannon fire rained down on the field as Hamilton and his men charged the enemy lines. Hamilton's heart pounded not with fear but with the certainty that this was his moment. "Forward, men!" he shouted as he leapt over the barricades. The hand-to-hand combat was brutal. The cries of the wounded and the clash of swords filled the air. But when the dust settled, the redoubt was in the Patriots' hands. Hamilton, bloodied but alive, looked at his men with pride. In the British headquarters, Cornwallis knew the end was near. Patriot cannons fired relentlessly, reducing his defenses to rubble. Finally, on October 19, 1781, Cornwallis sent a messenger to Washington, requesting surrender. The moment of surrender was solemn. Cornwallis, claiming illness, did not appear in person, sending his second-in-command instead. Washington, ever conscious of dignity and respect, ordered his own second-in-command, General Benjamin Lincoln, to accept the British sword. It was a reminder that this victory was not his alone but belonged to all who had fought and died for the cause. That night, men and women in the Patriot camp celebrated, though tears of joy mixed with tears of sorrow for those who weren't there to see the victory. Epilogue, a new beginning in 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the independence of the 13 colonies was officially recognized. The world had changed forever, but the cost had been immense. In Philadelphia, as the bells rang, a young boy named William approached his grandfather, a veteran of Lexington. "Grandfather, is this freedom?" he asked. The old man, with weary eyes, replied, "It's the beginning, boy. Freedom is not won in a single day. It must be tended every day." As the new nation took its first steps, the challenges were immense. How to unite the colonies under a common government, how to address the issue of slavery, which continued to divide the nation, and how to ensure that the sacrifices of the forgotten were not in vain. Thomas Paine, in one of his final writings, reflected, "The struggle for freedom does not end with war, it begins with it. The true challenge is to build a world where freedom is not just a dream but a reality for all."